Ash fell in languid spirals through the roofless ribs of the hall, and each thread of it found its way to his tongue, dry and bitter, as if the city itself were being sifted into a fine meal to feed the wind. Jon stood with the weight of her in his arms and could not, for the breadth of several breaths, remember how to breathe. She was light in death. That fact pricked him strangely. In life she had seemed to fill the room, all fire and intention and the straightness of her gaze. Now her body lay limp and compliant against him, every muscle unstrung. His hands were sticky and cooling. The knife he had used had fallen and rattled somewhere and then was silent, like a small animal that had been running and had learned, at last, how to be still. He did not call her name. It had been a sweet name on his lips once, full of promise. The shape of it now would be a bell pealing over rubble, and bells had rung enough in this city. He laid her down beneath the charred mound where a throne had stood, swords melted and gone to slag and black glass by a dragon's morning breath. The iron had run and pooled as if it, too, were a living thing that could not bear to keep its shape any longer. He set her hair carefully so it did not snag on a shard, and thumbed her eyelids closed, and watched them slide open again against his will until he smoothed them down once more and held them a moment longer, as if eyelids could be taught a last obedience. It was very quiet. He heard the cinder crackle in some distant timber, the sigh of a collateral weld cooling in the air, the faint rustle of ash finding ash. The blackened window had a gap where a pane had burst, and through it the pallid light fell at an angle. Dust motes drifted like a slow, old snow. He licked his lips and tasted metal. When he rose, he swayed. He had fought battles and kept his feet on worse ground. He did not understand why his knees wanted to forget him now. He put his palm against the cracked stone beside him, and it was warm still with the day's scorching. The warmth recalled a memory of another stone wall, cold with night, the wind scraping at the battlements of Winterfell, the torches guttering in their brackets. As if the castle of his childhood, no, he corrected himself, the castle of his life, had come to peer into this ruin and lean its shoulder against his. He thought, stupidly, to fetch a shroud. He would find linen. He would carry her down to where there was water, clean what he could, bind what he had unbound. He took 2 steps and caught at nothing. The absence of the beast was a chasm with edges. He could feel its teeth. Drogon had keened and blistered iron and gone, vanished into gray sky with her slung in his talons, an ache shaped like a body torn out of the air. It had happened when, a measure of heartbeats ago, the mind stitched itself crookedly when grief put a hand on it. He reached for the memory and it skittered away. Nothing to be done. The dragon had carried the queen where dragons carry their dead. There was old tale enough and superstition enough to believe in secret shores and fiery islands, but tales and superstitions were the clothing men put on when they did not want to look at the nakedness of what was left. Ruin and a hall that breathed ash. He was alone. He was not alone for long. Footsteps, light, ordered, exact, entered the hall. He knew at once by the measure of them who owned those steps. The Unsullied moved in a cadence all their own. He wanted to wipe his hands. The blood had dried and flaked like rust. He found a length of torn drapery and scraped palms he did not recognize as his. He did it without haste and without pretense of secrecy, because hiding was for a boy, and the boy had died many times by now and always woken into a man with fewer places left to hide. Grey Worm stopped several strides from him. The spears at his back came to a halt, too. Their spearheads did not dip. Their masks, their faces, each was flat stone, uncarved. The captain had burned grime across his cheek in a streak, an accident of wind and ash. His eyes, the color of dark wood at night, were sunk deep and raw with sleeplessness. "She is dead," Grey Worm said. Jon swallowed. His voice had a way of going hoarse when he needed it. "She is," he answered. He could have said, "I am sorry." To whom would he say it? To the Unsullied who had never been offered the 2 words in all their lives? To himself, who had wanted to be 2 men and had found the seam between them imperfectly sewn. "It was I," he added, because truth was habit and habit is a kind of mercy. There was a flinch somewhere among the spears, the rippling of a muscle. Grey Worm's mouth did not change, but something, The tightness around the eyes, perhaps, pulled taut. "Why are you alive?" he asked. If there was grief in the question, it sounded like a blade wrapped in cloth. "Because a dragon chose it so," Jon said, surprising himself with the simplicity in the answer. Perhaps because there are other things left to be done that only the living can do." Grey Worm looked past him to the slab where metal had melted and set, where ash lay like a thin sheet on a bed. He said nothing for several heartbeats. He was a man who had learned to count without numbers, to measure everything by the length of pain. When he spoke again, he spoke to a different matter altogether. "Soldiers at the base of the hill, the city, the dead are not finished with us." "I imagine not." Jon's mouth moved before his mind caught up with it. He had been shaped by battle. When one struck again. The city below them groaned like an old creature. The streets were laced with smoke. The stones were cracked. There were flies already where bodies lay. He had seen women hunkered over bundles that had not cried in hours. He had seen men with their faces in their hands, as if their faces were something they could set down and discard. He was not sure how many bells had pealed, or how New York had been cast down and shattered. It had rained ash and embers and shards of glass, and in the red wind people had run. "Your army?" Grey Worm said, and for the first time there was something like a sting to his words. "Will want an order, if you have one." "My army," Jon repeated. He thought of the men who had come south with him, northerners bruised from their winters, with hands that knew the shapes of axes and kettles, knights from the Vale, grim faces from Bear Island and white-eyed boys from the last hearth who had lost fathers and uncles and were too tired to be boys anymore and too bewildered yet to be the men who replaced them. He thought of the stark banners that had flown in a storm of ash. "My army," he said again, and felt the words fit his mouth differently than the last time he had said them in the field, as if they had grown thorns. "What would you have me order them to do?" "Lay down their arms. Kneel. D." Grey Worm spoke without heat, as if reading the steps of a ritual. "These are the orders that fit the shape of what has been done here." His chin lifted half a span. "Or run. Some men are fond of that, too." There was no safety in anger here, and no place for apology that would be misheard as pleading. Jon let the silence widen, watched ash multiply in the air between them, in a quiet that long thought rises like fish in a clear stream. He saw the shape of a thing he had not meant to see, the long curve of duty, how it could steam the flesh from bone and still leave the bone upright to bear a handful of the weight. The north was far behind him. The men who had followed him were not made for city work. They would haul timbers and dig ditches and do what needed doing because the north was a hard place and men learned to be handy. But the city would not forgive their flags or their tongues or their eyes. It would take a different thing to bind this ruin back into something that could be lived in without flinching. "I will not run," Jon said. "And I will not kneel to any who would burn a city for song." He thought then of her and felt a disloyalty cross his face and did not know where to put it. He placed it on the floor with the rest. Grey Worm's gaze flicked to the smear of blood on Jon's wrist where his cleaning had failed. "There must be judgment. The unsullied do not hesitate in judgment. I do not wish for talk." "Then do what you have done before," Jon replied. "Seize me, bind me, tie me to the post you have in your mind. But know this, there are too many mouths in the city, and not enough hands. Decide if your hatred will put roofs across the broken rafters and bread in the mouths. Decide if vengeance will mend a cistern." The spears did not shift. Grey Worm's jaw muscle worked once and was still. He had been made as boys are unmade. He was an instrument built for the music of war. But a man is more than the tune he was taught to hum. Something old and deep, older than training, bent him without he knew it. The habit of listening to those who had stood in mud with their boots sinking and chosen, as he had chosen, to go forward. He was not alone in not being alone. "What do you propose?" he asked. "I propose," Jon said, and felt a bare coherence come into the air around the words, "that you put down your spears and do not slaughter the men who came here to do what you asked of them before you turned your fire on them. I propose that the great families, what is left of them, gather at the dragon pit to speak, not in the language of fire, nor of ropes, but of the simple words men use when they bargain for hay or salted meat. I propose that they hear, from my mouth, the truth, and then they choose. If they choose me to answer for what has been done, I will not refuse. If they choose another, I will not refuse the price. The price is blood, said Grey Worm. It is, Jon returned, and took care that his voice neither bent nor sharpened. But it is also bread put into hands that shake from hunger. It is bridges laid across gutters. If you kill me now, men will fight for the idea of me and against the fact of your spears. And if you chain me, you will be chaining the easiest thing to hold. The rest, the grief, the hunger, the brokenness, will slip through your fingers and go around you and over you. And you will wake one morning and realize you are guarding a post whose rope holds nothing. A long breath went through Grey Worm's nostrils. You speak like a man who expects to persuade me to let you live. I speak like a man who expects to live long enough to do what must be done, Jon answered, surprised at how true the thought sat in him when he set it down. Grey Worm considered, and in the end did the thing he had learned to do best, yield a span to win a field. He raised his palm, and the spears lifted fractionally and moved, as one, a pace back. They did not lower. He did not step forward. He did not offer his hand. He said, Tyrion Lannister is in a cell. If there is to be talking, he will be among the mouths that shape it. I will not promise you his life. I will promise that a day will come when men kneel or stand without swords touching their backs, and that day will begin in the morning. If you come to the dragon pit, come under your own weight, not a rope's. We will hear you, but know that in the night I will not sleep. And if you fail this city in the days that follow, I will sleep well enough after I have killed you. That seems fair, Jon said, and almost smiled at the edge of weariness. Grey Worm's head moved half an inch. The Unsullied withdrew with motion smooth as oil poured. Their footsteps were as exact as before and then were gone. The hall breathed. Jon stood in it. He felt a tremor begin in his hands and pass along his arms and settle in his chest, and he let it move him. There are tremors a man holds as an enemy at the gate. There are tremors one invites to sit and drink their fill and leave what warmth they have. He turned toward a corridor that led to the dungeons, moving through light and shadow, through the smell of stone that had cooked and cooled and now stank faintly of something like scorched fat. He passed tapestries that had been half-eaten by flame, faces in thread looking up through blackened holes. He found the stair by touch, the stone slick with soot under his palm, and came down into air that was 2 degrees cooler and tasted of water and iron. A guard No. 2 stood at the cell door. They had the look of men drafted out of a thin pool, sleeves too long, belts cinched in one extra notch, one with shaving cuts on his jaw that had wept and now crusted. They recognized him and did not open their mouths. One fumbled keys as if he had not expected his fingers to be asked to do a task so quickly. The iron gate grumbled and then gave up a squeal that sounded strangely like a complaint of an old cook when a pan was mishandled. Jon looked in at Tyrion. The dwarf sat on the floor with his back against the wall, knees drawn up in imitation of a posture that might have been comfortable if it had not been adopted on stone. He had a growth of beard that showed uneven gray, and his lip was split and had puffed just enough to make his words stumble. He lifted his eyes and the little light caught them and made them water. "Ah," Tyrion said after a moment in which he took in Jon's face, Jon's hands, the ash still stippling his hair. "You have come to say farewell or to ask for advice. The first I can do in a sentence. The second will take wine." "There is no wine," Jon said. "There is only talk." "Then we will drink that." "Sit," Tyrion advised, with the authority a man uses when commanding dogs and kings. "My eyes would be grateful for a friend at the height of a friend and not the height of a sentry." He tilted his head in apology to the guards. "No offense. You stand admirably. If I were the sort who wrote hymns, I would write one to you and your uprightness. Now, Jon." Jon sank down, the stone cool through his breeches. He stretched his legs out one by one, and the stiffness in them had something of pain and something of relief. He told Tyrion what had been done. The words came out like objects rescued from water, slick and heavy. Tyrion listened with his fingers steepled and his mouth bent in a shape that was not contempt and not pity. When Jon finished, Tyrion rubbed his lip with his thumb and winced at his own pressure. "So," he said, "you have made the largest mistake in the smallest room. That is fitting. I will not congratulate you, neither will I condemn you. It is not my place to do either. But here is a difficult truth. After the sucker punch of what happened in that hall comes the slogging footwork of what must happen outside of it. You have two options. You have likely thought of both. Allow me to name them so they put on clothes. The first, go north. Take the black that is not black anymore. Put your feet on the old boards of old walls. Console yourself with wind and wolves and the morality of exile. In this option, the city rots slowly. The unsullied fill it with a rectitude they mistake for justice. The houses feed off of one another with quiet knives. There will be quiet for a time, and then there will be something worse than noise. The second, take the thing that has always been the problem for you, your blood, and make it the solution. Your name as it was given to you by the man who loved you is Stark. Your name as it was hammered into you by accident is Targaryen. Both names open doors and both frighten horses. You go to the dragon pit. You stand in a circle of people who will hate you for different reasons and love you for a few of the same. You tell them the truth. You say that in the absence of that chair. He flicked his eyes upward, as if he could see through the ceiling the heap of scoria that used to be the seat of kings. You will be the thing that sits. You let them pick you or another. If they pick you, you do the work. If they pick another, well, I hope you have learned how to be at peace with the work you will not be allowed to do. Jon waited. Tyrion had a way of stopping one breath before the end of what he had to say, to allow room for a man to push him there, so that the end was always yours. I came here intending, Jon said carefully, only the first through wall of it, to say that there should be counsel, that the houses should choose. It was Grey Worm's undersoldier who brought me down to the shape you have drawn. If the choice comes, if they ask, I will not refuse. Good, Tyrion said softly, and an odd brightness passed briefly across his face, like the sheen on a knife's edge when it is turned. Good, not because I think you want it. Gods help us if you wanted it. Want has ruined more kings than drought and bad harvest. Good because when I take what I know of you and put it in a pot with what I know of what we need, the stew that results is not perfect, nothing is, but it will keep a child alive and perhaps even grow him to a man. And at this moment in history I will settle for any stew that does not kill what depends on it. They will want my head, Jon said, not as complaint but as a ledger entry. They will, Tyrion agreed. And some of those who want it will be right and some will be fashionable. You will speak to the first and ignore the second. I killed her. The words were not a question and not a confession anymore. They had been rubbed by use into a different shape. Yes, Tyrion said. He did not reach to touch Jon. He had touched very little in his life that had not bruised him back. You did, and now you must learn to live in the after of that. Do you know what is required of such living? It is not a penance I would choose for a friend, but since you have chosen it and called it by another name, I will speak to its requirements when you ask for them. What are they? You will be answered for everything you do, and you will be answered for everything why. Oh, you do not do, and the answers will be louder and more numerous for the things you do not do. You will be denied sleep. You will be refused the right to be ordinary. You will eat when others are hungry. You will be warm when others are cold. You will be expected to feel that these are crimes. Some days you will be forgiven for feeling it. Some days you will not. You will learn the names of 1,000 children who did not live because a bridge fell or a canal blocked or a wagon was late by an hour and a storm hit a village. You will be told their names by people who need to tell them to someone. You will be the someone. You will make mistakes and you will not take comfort in the thought that everyone makes them because your mistakes will weigh a different amount. You will not take a second wife in haste. You will, if you are wise, take counsel from men who annoy you and women who remind you of your sister. You will despise me several times a day and still keep me within speaking distance. That last is selfish of me to say, but here we are. Jon watched the way a curve of light drifted along the damp in the mortar. There were little grains there from sand in the mix, shining like bits of old coin. "If they ask me to be king," he said, "I will say yes." He tried to put weight behind the words and found the weight was his. He did not look to the gods in that moment. He had done enough of that young and had learned exactly how much could be asked of a god and how much a man would have to ask of himself. Tyrion smiled and then hid it because he was ashamed to have wanted this so badly from a man who had had no time to recover his breath. "Good," he said lightly, as if the thing decided were no more than the spice they would use in a stew. "Go sleep if sleep can be borrowed from this broken place. Wash your hands. A king should approach his fate with clean hands. Wake hungry but not so hungry that it rips your patience. I will be fetched when they fetch me. In the morning we will go to the pit where dragons once were put on display, and we will put other creatures there and hope they are as well trained." Jon stood. He put his palm briefly against iron. The gate grated closed, a sound like a throat clearing, and then he was in a corridor again, and the air above the dungeons did not seem as warm as it had before. He found a basin in a room where a wall had blown out and the basin had somehow kept its dignity. He poured water from a cracked ewer. The water was stained with flecks of mortar. He washed his hands until his skin felt new. He dragged a rag over his face and hair. His reflection in the water was no more than a darker smudge on a pale field. He considered the smudge and nodded to it as if it were a man he had seen at market and then had no more to do with it. He found a bench in a room that smelled of burnt bookbinders and stared at the ceiling until sleep came up through the floor like something that had seeped through and would not be held back. He slept for a while and rose with his mouth tasting of plaster. The morning made the broken city look honest. Night had an old trick of taking away the edges of things and making edges into story. Daylight had no patience for stories that prettified. The statues that lay broken were broken without romance. The brass had cooled and was just cooled brass. Dogs had found themselves necessary. Smoke lay in folds where the wind could not be bothered to pry it loose. Jon worked his way down the hill to the dragon pit, passing the dead and the nearly dead and the living who occupied that narrow strip between. He set his jaw against the urge to stop at every child who cried, to lift every beam that lay across a threshold, to distribute himself like a cup of water over coals that would not be quenched by that measure. He had learned enough, painfully enough, to understand that the thing one can do is better than the many things one can want to do. He sent 2 men to fetch timber from a yard he could see. He told a woman where the cistern lines lay and how to dig with others. He found a boy and set him a job carrying messages between corners. He did these things like a man placing stones to form a pattern not yet visible but inevitable. The dragon pit's great semicircle held dust on its benches and shadows that had not moved in days. Birds had nested in the highest arches and had not been convinced by fire to leave. Their droppings made white constellations on the old stone. Here, once, kings and those who played at being kings had come to show the city that what they owned would obey them. Men would come now to show the city whether they could obey themselves. The seats filled in slow degrees, as if the city were remembering the shape of a gathering. Yara Greyjoy took her place with a stiff set to her shoulders that spoke of a readiness to be insulted and a history of practice at answering insults with knives. Gendry Baratheon came with 3 men and a boy carrying a staff with a sigil on it that he did not seem sure where to put. He kept it at his side like a broom. Ser Davos Seaworth looked thinner and more tired than Jon had seen him in any winter. He had his hands on his belt like a sailor trying to find his balance on boards he did not know. Samwell Tarly had come, too. God knew how he had gotten there so quickly, but some men fold leagues like cloth when panic or love tells them to. Brienne of Tarth stood with a poise that made tired men stand straighter and shamed boys into quiet. Edmure Tully, weary and trying too hard, shifted on his bench and made room where none was required. The young Lord of the Vale had grown into the length of his bones, but not yet into the coordination to put them to use. He looked solemn and, from time to time, vaguely pleased with himself. Lord Royce had the heaviness of a mountain that had learned walking. The Dornish had sent a cadet cousin with eyes like a desert cat, cool and a little amused, as if to say that in the south they made sport of the north seriousness. Sansa came, and the sight of her, the exactness with which she had become herself, put a pain in Jon so sudden he had to put his fist against his ribs as if he might hold the ache still. Arya came, her steps softer than the rest, her gaze quick and taking in empty spaces as if emptiness were as important as presence. Bran had been set with quiet grace on a platform that made it easier for him to see and be seen. His hands lay in his lap like birds that had learned not to startle. The council was a gathering of what had survived and what was willing to be seen to survive. Grey Worm stood at the center. He spoke without preamble and without ceremony, as if both were luxuries and he had no money. The queen is dead. The city is broken. We will choose a leader. Speak the names. They did. Names were thrown into air like stones at a pond to see how the ripples would go. There was some politeness at first. Men said the names of their neighbors, names of men whose fathers had fought with theirs, names that tasted familiar on tongues. Tully, Royce, Aaron, Greyjoy, Baratheon. Names said with the confidence of helping a drunk man find his chair. Then Tyrion spoke, and though his mouth was dry and his heart was doing the quick, treacherous thing a heart does in the cage of a rib, he made his words find each other and hold. He spoke of what words mean: king, rule, throne, and of what they had meant not long ago when fire had been poured like oil from the sky and a screaming city had been the wick. He said that a chair had been taken from them and that this was a gift. He said that they might choose a hand without a chair, a man without the iron to cut his thighs. He said that choices made in daylight are better than oaths sworn in darkness, and that if they had ever wanted to be the ones who were asked instead of the ones who were told, this was that now. The ripple spread. Men leaned forward, then back. Eyes flicked. Hands rested. Sansa's chin tilted and lines tightened at the corner of her mouth, and Jon knew those lines, and he knew what they meant, and his heart sank and lifted in the same measure. She would not be bullied. That was good. She would not be easy. That was also good. Arya's gaze flicked from face to face, poised to fence the false. Bran looked at the sky, at the birds coming and going, and perhaps saw none of the men below him and all of them at once. "Jon Snow," said Tyrion at last, and there it lay, wrenched from his chest with the effort of saying the name of a friend and making it a public thing, set in the ring where men can throw stones at it. Jon Snow, who is not only Jon Snow but, if we are working in the currency of blood, Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, as those who were in the crypts of Winterfell will attest, and as no man with eyes would deny when he sees his face. He has done the dirtiest work more times than I care to count and less than he deserves to be remembered. He defended the city when it could be defended, and when it could not he did the most terrible and honest thing a man can do and stayed to see the terrible through. If you want a king who will ask himself hard questions and not like the answers and do the thing that must be done anyway, pick a man who already knows how it feels to despise himself and keep walking. Silence, then murmur, then voices, then, like fish that had been waiting below the surface, the noises rose and showed their backs. Yara stood. "If we are to put a man who killed my queen on a chair that no longer exists, let us do it with open eyes," she said. "But I am of the Ironborn, and we ask what profit there is in any bargain. What profit is there for those of us whose boats still float, whose islands cannot be burned by dragons as neatly as streets can, who prize a quick raid and a hard wind? Will this king who is being made, if he is being made, release us to salt and our own ways? I will not kneel to tide. I will not bring my knee here if the knee is to be chained." "The North," Sansa said, not waiting her turn because turns are for those who have not learned when to cut in, "will not be part of a realm that burns its own. If a king is to be made here, if a king is to be chosen in this smoke, the North will honor your king as an ally, but it will honor itself as a thing whole and separate, and I will be queen in the North in answer to my people and not yours." There was a hum, a nettled energy, as if a hive had been jostled. Some Royce Sam looked at Jon and then at her and then at him again, trying to read in his face whether this was betrayal or a plan they could not see into. Arya watched Sansa with a sister's pride digested into a stranger's composure. Jon stood. He did not open his mouth at once. He let the silence reacquaint itself with the pit. He had learned that men feared silence. They would fill it with their own betrayals if given the chance. He waited until he felt certain of the press of earth beneath his boot soles. "I killed the last queen," he said, and the simplicity knocked a few breaths out of a few chests. I killed her not because I thought I was fit to wear anything woven from her remains. I killed her because she had become a danger to those she had sworn to protect, and to whom I had sworn other oaths. Do with that what you will. Throw it back in my face or set it down and pick up something else. But I will not have it said that it is a secret. If you choose me, you will be choosing a man whose hands are not clean and never will be." He turned his head to Sansa and let his eyes sharpen only enough to say what eyes can say when a brother and a sister have known each other's steps in the snow. "The North will not be made to do anything at sword point while I draw breath. If the North will have you as Queen, Sansa, and if you will have the North, speak now what you will require and what you will give. If the rest will have me, I will be king to those who wish to be governed and to those who are too tired to stand the labor of governing themselves. I will be king in daylight. I will hold no secret terrors. I will not hold the torch in one hand and bread in the other. If you do not choose me, if you choose another, then choose one who says something like that. If you choose a man who speaks only of glory and vengeance and setting records straight, you will have bought yourselves a little while and sold your children into thirst." He stopped. He had no appetite for the sound of his own voice. He looked at Grey Worm and waited as if he were a citizen of a small town who had spoken at a meeting and expected to be hissed or clapped and go home to his supper. He looked at the faces of men the histories would name and men the histories would not bother naming. He found Sam's face and found there a friend's love, wet and achingly kind, and something else, belief of a sort that a man can live off of for a week when there is no food. It went as it always does when men gather in numbers that become a flock. First one or two said it, as if to see how it felt on their tongues. Aye. Then a few more said it to see if they liked the sound in their mouths more or less. Then a group that had been waiting to be told which way the wind would go shouted it with relief and conviction. The dissenters kept their dissent sharp and small. The ones with knives kept their knives sheathed and grew sour faces. Yara did not kneel, but she bowed her head half a hand's breadth. The Dornish cousin smiled a cat smile. Gendry shouted with a boy's voice, and then looked embarrassed at the youth in it, and then smiled at his own embarrassment because you cannot hold yourself at an age you do not yet own. Sansa's mouth did not move. Her eyes did not blink often. When Jon turned to her, because a man turning to a woman in that moment is a turning of more than neck and spine, it is an acknowledgement that the world is not held up by one beam. He found her already looking at him, and the old understanding passed between them like a coin moving from hand to hand under a table, not meant to be seen. She nodded once, a fraction, and then said in a voice pitched to be heard by the evasive corners of the pit, "The North will be free. Brother, if you are king to the rest of them, I am queen to those who will not call you king. This is not rudeness. This is not spitting in your face. This is what the North paid for in blood, and it will have what it paid for. What I offer, bread and salt to your envoys, levies in time of grave peril if I judge the peril to me also, free passage across the neck to traitors, and a consideration of debts owed by my father's house to yours." She said the last with a wryness that made two men blink as if they had felt a knife pass close to their throats and not touch. Jon looked at the men of the Vale, at Davos, at the Dornish cousin, at Yara, at Edmure with his anxieties arranged at the corners of his mouth like ornaments. He did not look at Grey Worm. "It is enough," he said. "It is more than I expected. The North will be free, and I will count myself fortunate that when I turn my back to the wind, I will know that my sister sits behind me with a back as straight." A sound like a breath going out went around the pit and then came back in. Grey Worm watched the shape of what had been made in front of him as if he were being asked to recognize a thing he had not thought existed. When he spoke, he did not bother to widen his voice so it carried to edges. He addressed Jon and not the pit. "So," he said, "they choose you. The soldier in me knows how to answer a choice. I say yes or no. The man in me is learning a new word. If." He spread his fingers in the smallest of gestures. "If we are to obey this choice, we will then require—" "What is the word?" "Satisfaction." "You want blood," Jon said without rancor. "I want justice," Grey Worm returned. "I want something that sits in my chest and allows me to eat without choking. I want my soldiers to understand that their dead have been considered and not used. If this city is to be built, I want it built on something better than ash and a story about mercy. We will not rewrite the beginning, Jon said. We will write the next page. If you wish to leave and seek a life without me in it, I will not send men after you. If you wish to stay, to serve the city in peace, I will not ask you to bend your back under a man you cannot obey without hating. If you wish for a thing to take away so that your men may eat without choking, I will give you something. Not my head. It is not vanity. It is calculation. My head will not feed them long. It will not roof the houses. It will not teach your boys to look at something that is not a spear. Take ships. Take gold. Take the choice to go to a place where a woman you loved wished to see her people made safe. Build that. Let that be justice. Grey Worm's face did not move for some breaths and then moved a little, like ice loosening its grip on a bank stone. There is an island without stinging flies, he said, and there was a note in his voice that made a few in the pit turn their heads and look at him as if they were seeing him for the first time and he were not made of iron. We will go there with boats. We will build. We will make a rule and live by it. But there are men here who will not leave. There are men who were boys when they were taken and have no taste for islands. They will stay. They will not kneel. They will keep their spears. He narrowed his eyes. Do not make them your guards. They will never be your guards. I would not insult them with that dishonor, Jon said dryly, and to his own surprise a few men in hearing laughed the small laugh men laugh when a thing is both true and stings. Grey Worm's gaze sharpened, and for the first time there was the faintest suggestion of a smile at the corner of his mouth, something like a muscle flex. ing in the memory of its old use. We will stay until the ships are prepared, Grey Worm said. We will take timber and pay for it with the coin you will give us. If the men who stay are pressed, they will press back. If they are left, they will be left. I will come to speak to you before we leave, and I will not pretend anything my mouth says then will be sweet. You have never been sweet, and I had never thought to want your sweetness, Jon said. So, Grey Worm said. So. The council ended not with a flourish of trumpets, but with the sound of men getting to their feet and deciding that something would be done with a day. Jon found himself standing and not knowing what to do with his hands. A sensation familiar from the far past when he had been a boy who had never guessed he would marry and kill and be named king in a wreck. Sam found him first and put both hands on his forearms quickly and then let go, as if he had done something illicit. I have, Sam said without preface, because when your friend has been named king and you have slept badly, preface seems like a pack of unnecessary words. Been in the library at the Citadel long enough to know that kings can be made out of worse things than men with your habits. You will need books. You will need a man who knows what a page can do even when a sword is near it. You will need a sewer plan. Do not laugh at me. The city will die of its own filth if you do not coax it into different habits. I am not laughing, Jon said, and he was not. The words landed with the weight of immediate usefulness, and that weight felt good in his hands. Find the plans. Find whoever knows who put them on paper. Tell me what we need to dig and where and how to pay the men. Tell me how to keep the plague from giving us the rest of our dead. I will, Sam said. He had grown softer in the face and harder in the eyes, a combination that speaks of a man whose kindness has been sharpened by the need to ask for things he knows it will be difficult to be given. And Jon, your grace. Not that, Jon said quickly. Not here. Not with you.
Sam snorted.
As if I would obey you. Listen. Alyson of Old Town wrote to her husband about drainage as if it were romance. She wrote well too. I will bring you her letter. You will enjoy it. There are few pleasures left to kings. Let me give you this one. Jon shook his head but smiled despite himself and left the pit and walked into a day which had a strange cleanness in it for all its smoke. He found Davos at the bottom of the steps, fussing, which is to say taking measure of everything that needed doing and then doing the thing closest to hand. We need ships, Davos said in the tone of a man who had been told this would be the case and now was telling the world the same. We need lumber. We need men whose hands have not forgotten knots. We need to patch the outer walls. We need a word with what remains of the gold cloaks because an idle man with a badge is the most dangerous thing in a city. And those bastards have been made idle in every sense that matters. We need food, we always need food. The stores in the granaries at King's Landing were lean before the fire. Now they are lean enough to be clothes on a body. We can call in neighbor help, but you know what neighbor help tastes like. A thin stew with a lot of talk in it. I'll send boats up the Blackwater for grain before you can say privy. I will. We need coin. I am not a man wants to say that to a king, but if we don't pay we'll have trouble that won't wait its turn. I will put coin on your table, John said, unsure for the smallest of moments where coin would come from, and then remembering in a cold flood that coin grows like mold in the places men least look. The Lannister caches, the Tyrell vaults, the cells beneath the Red Keep where things were put and forgotten because forgetting them felt like virtue to those who hid them. Tyrion will know. Bronn will know more than Tyrion would like to admit. We will not rob. We will rearrange. The realm will be paid back by being allowed to live. You sound like a man who has a pen in his hand and ink that will not wash off, Davos said wryly, and then his craggy face softened. I am proud of you, lad. He sounded as if he were admitting to something that might cost him, like liking a cat. I am proud of you for not running to where you're comfortable to die there. There are plenty of men in this world who have learned how to die well. Not as many who have learned how to do this. He gestured at the city as if it were a recalcitrant child. She was always trouble. She will be again. Now let's find a way to feed her without breeding her mischief. I am grateful for your trouble, John said, and meant it. He met Gendry near the blackened smithies, where the heat had been so great it had wrenched nails out of wood and bent them into curls. The smith held a length of metal in his hand gingerly. It looked like part of a thing that had been destroyed and could be made into a thing yet to be made. I found this in the hall, Gendry said without title or fluster. He was still a boy in places, but he had the set in the shoulders of a man who knows his work and has learned not to be praised for it except on the day when praise is all that keeps the blood in a body. It's like a pool where iron's set. If a body had the notion, he could heat the bastard and draw it out and make, oh, I don't know, a spade, a hook, a crown if he were the sort fancied making trifles that don't plow or fish. John looked at the lump. Make the crown, he said, and the words came up his throat of their own accord. Make it plain. Make it with as little of the old in it as you can manage. No spikes to cut a man's ears if he turns his head too swiftly. Make it so it can be worn without bleeding. If you can, he added, and then surprised himself by smiling. Make it so my hair doesn't look foolish under it. Gendry squinted at him as if measuring his skull with his eyes. I'll do you one better, he said. I'll make it fit like it was always meant to sit there. I never made a crown before. Might as well learn on the head of a man who won't hold it against me when I fuck it up the first time. Seems right, John said. Their eyes met, and in a strange angle of the day, John saw a ghost of the man who had sired the boy in front of him. The set of the brow, the capacity for laughter like thunder, and felt the peculiar twist that comes when a lineage is honored and denied in the same moment. Towards afternoon, when light had softened just enough to be kind to the ruins, Sansa came to him in what had been a garden, and was now a courtyard of stones with striations of black across them where vines had burned and left their signatures. There was a bench uncracked. She sat, and with a sister's authority he did not question. He sat beside her. You made it very easy for me, she said without preface, running her palm over the bench, feeling for splinters and finding none. I thought I would have to cut it. You put the knife in my hand and held the throat up to me. Do you resent me for it? If I resent you, I will tell you when I can afford it, John said. It will not be today. She turned her face, and he saw the marks grief had made between her eyebrows and along the line of her mouth. She had learned what women always learn a few years before men have to, which is the exact expression one can wear while the house burns in order that the children do not scream more loudly. They will test you, she said. The men who accepted you today will test you tomorrow, so that they can have the satisfaction of forgiving you the next day. The ones who did not accept you will test you so they can continue not accepting you with better reasons. I will test you because you are my brother and because it is my habit and my inheritance to test rulers until I can be sure the people below them can sleep. I do not know if I will like everything you do. I do not know if you will like everything I do, but you will not be surprised by either of our dislike. We have grown into the sort of people who tell each other our dislikes and then eat the soup anyway. I count on that, Jon said. I count on you to be the thorn in my palm that keeps me from sleeping too long or too sweetly. Do you count on me to be anything to you? I count on you, she said, and the quiet in her voice then would have knocked a taller man down. To be a decent man when decency feels like a luxury no one can afford. I count on you, she added, allowing herself a hint of the old tartness. To be maddeningly brave in ways that require me to send men to fetch you out of trouble. I count on you to remember the names of people who cannot walk into rooms like this and find a bench that is unbroken and place their asses on it as if that were their right. I count on you to look like our father when you must, and to look like our uncle when it will do more good. The mention of their father and the mention of the uncle who had been a stranger both went into him with the specific ache reserved for the dead who had been explanations for a long time and then had had to be accepted as mysterious. He would have hated it, Jon said after a time, because filial piety is sometimes best honored by telling the truth. He would have stood for a day in the hall and for a night on the wall, and then left it to a man he trusted and gone to sit by a fire and look at the flames and think about law. That is what made him bearable and what made him dangerous, Sansa said. We are neither of us fortunate enough to be like him in that way, so we will do other things. Jon, there is trouble already. It does not wait its turn, you know? I am learning its rudeness, he said wearily. The gold cloaks, Sansa said. They have been wandering like bees whose hive has been stolen. Some of them are taking bribes in corners. Some of them were always going to. Some are drowning in cheap drink and waking at noon and finding it still noon. Some are angry and bored. They are starting to organize themselves in their own fashion, which never ends with anyone honest being pleased. You need a new order. Not your own men, they will be seen, and their axes will look like oppression in this place. Not the unsullied. Not even to spite Grey Worm. Choose men who owe you nothing and the city everything. Ser Brienne knows the honorable ones. Davos knows the honest criminals. Put them together. Let them make something with a name that is not the old one and a sense of itself that is not just a badge. You have thought about this, Jon said, and did not try to keep admiration from his voice. I think when my hands are quiet, she said. I think in hallways. I think while combing hair. I think when I do not want to think and when I very much do. Do not imagine that the crown you will put on will sit on your head alone. If it is to sit at all, it will sit on a web of other people's hands. That is how crowns stay. When they are just iron, they fall. Arya came the next morning, silent as weather. She watched men bring timbers for bridges across the worst of the gutters. She watched a group of boys carry buckets from the river to splash the last smoking beams. She watched a woman with a torn hem dress awound with salted water and stubborn tenderness. She came to Jon when she had seen enough and had nothing in her eyes to tell him that she was coming to say goodbye in the way she knew best. Not with tears, not with a long speech at a gate, but with an arrival and then an absence that invited neither comment nor fret. You will go, Jon said, sitting down so he would not have to look down at her and give the moment the wrong shape. I will go, she said. There is a west. I am not a thing that stays. I am a thing that finds. I am better at that. You have given me permission without giving me permission, which is the sort of thing a go. OD brother does whether or not he approves, and I will not make a show of gratitude. I will thank you by sending back, if I can, a feather from a bird no one has seen here. Do not send your death, Jon said, and the word surprised him because he had not known he could say something so plain. I have harvested enough deaths, Arya answered, with no softness and no cruelty. I may collect a few more for my own pocket if I like the shapes of them, but I am learning that there are other things to collect. Maps, songs that do not know they are songs, sunburn, pants that fit a woman on a deck and do not get in the way when there is work to be done. I will not be long. I will be long. I do not know. Make a law that says no one may write to me if they have nothing to say. I do not make laws with your name on them, Jon said. Write if you wish. Forget us if you must. I will sit where I sit knowing that a part of my family is not a thing that can be sat near. He paused. Come back when you have learned something that will make me laugh. Come back when you have learned something that will make me vexed. Come back for the soup when Sam teaches it to the city." "I will," she said. She stood then, and in the shape of the way she stood there was all the affection she afforded the living world. She leaned forward and put her hand on the back of his neck for the space of one breath and then left it to the air, and he felt as though a bird had landed there and gone again. She walked away with steps like shadows. Tyrion came free that afternoon with the look of a man who had been in a house that smelled of old bread and now was walking into a kitchen where the dough had begun to rise again. He came with Bronn in his wake. Somehow Bronn always discovered the back doors even when the front door had been thrown off its hinges. Bronn took a look at Jon and grinned like a man measuring the price of wine at a festival. "So," Bronn said, "King Snow, I suppose I will be Lord take what I can while the getting's good. Master of coin if we are giving out toys to boys. Don't look at me like that. I am the only bastard in this city who knows where half the boxes are with the actual coin and not IOUs. You need a man who isn't ashamed to count." "You will count," Tyrion said, wrinkling his nose as if the whole subject smelled slightly of overripe fruit. "You will count under my eye and I will count under yours, and if we find a third eye we trust we will ask it to count as well. Between us we will make the numbers behave as numbers are meant to behave, to serve bread and pay men who have done work." "I want a castle," Bronn said flippantly, "because flippancy is armor for men who have no other. I want a name that is more than a joke in someone else's mouth." "You will want," Tyrion said without heat. "We all want. You are a man I will not give tender things to, because you are a man who sharpens his knives on tender things. I will give you a vault. I will give you a ledger. If you do well enough with those I will give you a chair and a locked door and the key to it. If you are very good, I may give you a friend." He glanced at Jon to show that he was making a joke, and then looked away because the joke did not feel as light as he had meant it. Gendry brought the crown 3 days later. It was as promised. Plain, a band no broader than a man's thumb, its iron dark and clean, without tooth or spike. It had a small pattern where the iron had set with imperfections the way cooling mud sets with leaves and stones in it. Gendry had worried them smooth but not invisible. He set it on a cloth in front of Jon and stepped back as if expecting laughter. Jon lifted it. It had the proper weight in his hands. Enough to remind, not enough to make his wrists tremble. He turned it in the light and saw that the small imperfections caught brightness in a way that would keep a man from forgetting where it had come from. He set it on his head with a touch that was half prudence and half the mental flinch of someone putting on a boot for the first time after an injury. To fit. Gendry's mouth twisted in satisfaction and then went shy, a boy show of being pleased with his own hand. "I will be crowned where the throne broke," Jon said to those who had to know, because the world goes more smoothly when those who carry basin and cloth are told in which direction to walk. "There will be no songs written for men to sing who like their stories with lies in them. There will be bread." The mention of bread went into the air and sank into people's shoulders like a visible thing. Bread makes a promise men understand. The day of the crowning dawned bright and harsh. No forgiving haze, no morning mist to make the edges look romantic. The hall was as before, ruined and not pretending otherwise. There were brooms and there were buckets and there was the smell of soap, which is the closest thing to hope the nose recognizes. Men and women who would be named if there were anyone with a quill and time took their places. Jon stood where a throne had been and let the absence settle behind him like a wall. He had dressed without jewels. He wore the black that had once meant one thing and now meant another. He wore a tunic made by a woman who had been paid for it the day before because he would not owe her for long. He felt the weight of eyes. He had always felt it, even in the smallest of rooms. It did not matter how many. It mattered whose. He found Sansa's face and took that into himself. He found Sam's, Davos's, Tyrion's. He did not look for Arya's and did not find it and felt that as the correct feeling. He breathed in, out. Tyrion spoke briefly and unadorned. "I would like to make a speech," he said, and a few men smiled as if they had expected that. "But I will not. If we survive a year, I will make a speech. If we survive 5, I will make 3. When we have buried the last of our dead from the fire and built the last roof that must be Bu. LT before winter comes. I will sit down and write a speech and make the birds carry it to every lordling with a taste for fancy words. For now, John." He stepped forward. He took the crown from Gendry's cloth. He had to stand on a step to reach John's head, and the angle made the gesture almost comic. The lack of comedy in the room held it steady. He set the iron down and did not make a fuss over it. "This crown was a chair," he said, which was both obvious and not. "And now it is a ring. May it hold and not cut." That was all. The hall breathed and was still. The crown settled as if a bird had chosen to rest there a while. John did not speak for a beat, and then another, and then took breath and did not speak words that had been written by anyone, because no one had had time to write, and the words a man says in such a place should smell of his mouth and not of lamp oil. He said, "We will do the simplest things first." He named them bread and water, night patrols against the men who would steal the small children and the small goods and the small safety. Sewers opened and the filth taken somewhere it would do less harm and perhaps some good. Carpenters paid in coin and meat. Roofs with stout nails, bread ovens mended. Each guild visited and asked what it needed first and what it could do without for a month. He watched men's shoulders shift when he spoke of the chain of command. They wanted something they could relish, a show of knives, and he gave them only a list of names and the instruction that the men with badges would be watched by other men without, and that all of them would sleep in places where those who loved them could easily come and pull them out by the ear if they became what they had too often been. He said, "There will be a census." And a murmur of surprise went around. Only the most boring men are startled by ledgers. And he said, "We will count, because if you cannot count, you cannot feed." And those who did not care for the thought did not have the courage just then to make it public. There was a moment, after the last word fell, before the first cheer came. It came small and was the best kind of cheer. A man who had not meant to make it made it and startled himself, and then laughed, and then found that he had not been silenced by any soldier. Others joined. It grew but did not swell into madness, and then it rained itself out, because the day had work in it that would not be deferred for clapping. He went out then and stood in a street where the air moved differently now because people were moving through it with errands and brooms. A girl approached him. 8 perhaps, with hair in a plait that had come half undone, and a nose scraped raw the way children's noses get when they have cried and then wiped it with the back of a hand for 2 days together. She held up a piece of stale bread. "Is this bread yours?" she asked in the manner of a judge, which is to say calmly. "It is not," John said. "It is bread that a woman baked and sold and a man bought and gave to you, and who is this man, and where is this woman, and would you like another loaf?" The girl considered. "I would," she said. "But I am to share this one with my aunt and my 3 cousins, and if I bring back another they will think I stole it, and then they will look at me different and we will have trouble. I would like to know when the rules will be the same 2 days in a row." "When we have done the first 10 things," John said. "If we do them badly, we will keep doing them until they are done well enough. You have my word." "Who are you?" she asked, not with insolence but with the flat curiosity children afford to all tall humans who talk to them. "I am John," he said. He did not say the other word. It would come to her ears soon enough and dress him in something he could not take off in front of a child without frightening her. "I am Miri," she said. And there was no tremor in her voice when she owned the name and dared fate to make a fool of her for saying it. "If the rules are the same 2 days in a row when I come back, I will stop throwing stones at the billhook man who has been taking copper from the cistern. He has a lip like a fish. It is very satisfying to throw stones at him." "That is a hard bargain," John said, and in the bargain found the sound of life returning. Because there is nothing so human as the desire to explain oneself to authority with nonsense. "Go," he added. "Tell your aunt that the rules will be the same 2 days in a row in a week if I can make them so, and in a month if I cannot. Tell her my name. Tell her if the fishlip man takes copper again, he will lose his teeth on bread so stale it ought to be used for building." This sort of justice, ridiculous, petty, sufficient, occupied the next days and made him useful in small ways that kept off the madness that comes for a man when he is expected to think only of the largest of things. He sat in puddles of shade, sweat between his shoulder blades and running down his back into his belt, and listened to men argue about gullets and walls and debt and love. He learned that when a woman made her complaint, the words she chose were typically better greased than a man's. that they went where they were meant to go quicker and made fewer stops along the way. He learned that when a man came with a petition written for him by a cousin, the cousin was often behind him and could be coaxed forward with 3 questions to make his own case properly. He learned that a child will always tell you the truth if you ask a question in the tone that implies you will tell her something in return if she does. He told stories. He told none of the big ones. He told the story about a stable with a door that would not stay shut because the latch had been put on wrong and the horse that had learned to operate it with his lips. And if he found that the story's punchline made grown men laugh until they wiped their eyes on their wrists, he did not judge himself for telling it too often. At night, he slept in a room that had 2 walls left and a roof that had been made by tying 2 planks together with rope and a third across them to discourage the sky from coming in. He lay on a pallet that had a straw smell and something else to it, a faint odor of the woman who had made it. He fell asleep quickly, not because peace had found him but because fatigue had, and fatigue is a blunt instrument. He woke in the small hours with the knowledge of her, a presence, a heat. Not a ghost, because she had never been the sort of thing that could be made into a ghost. He lay on his back and stared at the black beams and felt a weight on his chest that was not straps and not a crown and was entirely composed of the next 10,000 things that would be required of him. On the 3rd night, a raven came. It sat on the corner of the roof beam and watched him the way a tailor watches a man's shoulders to understand the slope. Cocked its head when he sat up. It wore no band. Ravens had learned long ago the art of going unmarked when the world demanded that they carry the words of men who would hang them for misplaced loyalty. He put his hand out slowly and it came nearer and then retreated with the quickness of a small fear. He fed it a strip of dried meat from his pouch. It hopped longwise and took the meat in its beak and tilted its head and seemed to decide something about him that was in his favor. He whispered words to it he had not imagined he would say to a bird and did not feel foolish saying. He did not know what bird gods did with the things men said to them, but he suspected they were more efficient than the gods he had grown up with because birds went places. In the frayed hours before dawn, Grey Worm came to him for the conversation he had vowed would not be sweet. They stood by the river where the water smelled of fish and pipe and waste. Torches burned on the quay in the hands of men who had learned how to hold fire properly. The unsullied captain looked thinner and looked himself. "We will go in 5 days," he said, as if reporting the weather. "We have the ships. We have the wood and iron. We have the men who will go. We will leave men at your wall, not to protect you, to make sure in their minds that we are not fleeing. We do not flee. We depart." "You depart," John said and nodded. He did not thank him. Grey Worm had not come for gratitude. "I have seen you," Grey Worm said. "You lift beams. You hand bread to children you do not know. You touch your own shoulder when you see a man with a missing arm as if you want to tell your body to learn to be missing something. I do not know if this will be enough. If it is not, do not say that we did not warn you. These people are weak and strong in the wrong places. Fire taught me that. Wall taught me that. You will save those who have learned how to be saved already. The others will tire you." "You are not wrong," John said. "I will take the tiredness. It is what I earn for the things I have done." "Do not think you are paying a debt," Grey Worm said sharply then, as if the words had stung him unprepared. "Debts do not pay for dead cities. Work does. The accounting is for old women in shops. The building is for men who can learn that their hands are good for something other than spears." There was a small silence in which both men looked out toward the place where the sea began, because both men had found that looking at water was preferable to looking at almost anything else when one had to think and wanted to hide the face one made while thinking. "There is," Grey Worm said without turning his head, "a kind of peace on an island. It is not the peace of victory. It is not the peace of the bed after a battle. It is the peace of seeing the same tree stand for a very long time and learning that it does not speak your name, but that if you are quiet enough it will allow you to sit under it without being mistaken for a thing that can be cut into something else. I do not have the words. I have the desire. I am not sorry to leave. I am not happy to leave. I am leaving. I have sat under trees," John said, because he did not have easy access to the language the man needed either. "They are good friends, trees. They are difficult friends. They do not tell you what they think. But when you lie against them, you are steadied. You may find your spines set in similar agreement. Grey Worm turned his head half an inch and then back. The man who killed my queen speaks like a poet and a farmer, he said with a flatness that was not contempt. I will see you one more time before we go. There is something I will say then that I will not say now because I do not know how to say it without bleeding. He left. The river went on being itself. Jon exhaled and counted his breaths because he had learned, in strange rooms and in tents made of strange cloth, that sometimes breathing is the only job a man can do for a moment and one must do it well. He wrote letters. He found that he wrote as his father had, plainly, without flourish, and with a steadiness purer than any oath he might have tried to adorn the sentences with. He wrote to the Manderleys and to White Harbor's master of docks. He wrote to a woman in the Reach whose husband had died of flux and whose vineyards wanted someone to manage them with a tight jaw and a sense of what grapes do when men stop watching. He wrote to the Iron Bank not to ask for coin but to tell them how counting would be done in this new arrangement, and the letter, when Sam read it a third time aloud, made a sound in the back of his throat like suspicion learning to become interest. At the end of the week, Brienne stood in his doorway, big and shy, an awkwardness a man could love for the sincerity of it. In her hands she held the book with the white spine and the weight of memory in it. She asked permission with her eyes, and when he gave it, she came and set the book down on a table that had been planed smooth that morning and smelled faintly of sap. I wrote for him, she said, and did not have to say the name because the ache consented at once to be named without naming. It is not enough. Nothing would be enough, but it is not lies. Thank you, Jon said, for him, for me in reading it, for any boy who will find it and make something of himself that did not exist before because you wrote. She shrugged then, a gesture that was practically an apology for having been noticed, and turned to leave and then turned back and looked at him and said a thing that mattered more to him than any of the praise men had been offering him for 2 days. You have a face, she said slowly, choosing words with care, that looks more like you than it did before. He would have known what to call you finally if he were here. He would have known which of his names to set on you, and the one he would have picked would have fit. Do not ask me which. I am a poor speaker, but I can read a face. He did not weep then. He did later, when the house was very quiet. He slept without dream and woke to the sound of hammers. When men working for a king in a city emptied of vanity take hammers to wood and nails to iron, there is a music that comes up from the streets that tells you more than songs sung in halls ever will about the state of a place. Tells you whether hope is a word or a weight. That morning the hammers said, "This is weight." That afternoon, a rumor slid into the city like a thin man who has learned to move through crowds without touching anyone. A dragon had been seen. There were men in the foothills outside the city who had seen a long shadow pass like a cloud that did not behave like a cloud, and an old shepherd whose son had gone to find a place that had milk had heard a noise like a mountain coughing. The rumor went everywhere a rumor goes. It was breathed into the ears of whores and into the ears of soldiers and into the ears of old men who sat on stoops and watched boys dare one another to leap still hot gutters. It found Jon as he was speaking to a woman with flour on her apron and made his spine choose to stiffen without asking his permission. "What will you do?" Tyrion asked, and the neatness of the question made Jon dislike him for a breath. "I will have soup," Jon said. "Then I will do what comes after soup." Tyrion inclined his head, accepting a rebuke that would have made a lesser man petulant. He went that evening up to a height where the wind carried more of the world in it and less of the city's damp. He brought no guard. Ghost came out of a shadow as if he had been stored there and then uncorked. The wolf's fur had singed in places and grown back oddly. His belly was fuller than it had been in winter. His eyes were what they had always been, which is to say patient and wild. Jon put his hand into the rough and scratched until Ghost made a low sound that told him that he remembered who they were to one another. He watched the sky until the sky felt watched. He found himself hoping and not hoping and could not decide which hope he preferred or which dread. A king without mystery is a tax collector. He did not want the dragon. He did. He wanted a sign that what had happened had been understood by something other than men. He wanted to know that nothing in the air had been left to float without meaning. He wanted to be left alone. He went back down the hill when the air had taken the heat out of its mouth. He slept. He woke with the knowledge that tomorrow would be another day in which men would ask him for things, and he would give them and be cursed for giving them as late and as insufficiently as any man can be when he does not hold bread as fish and fish as loaves in his hands. The next weeks went as work goes and as beginnings go when you do not give yourself the luxury of looking too far ahead. He found Bronn stealing and confronted him and found that he was not stealing badly and therefore must be allowed to steal where the stealing made sense and would make sense to those whose sense of justice requires the occasional muscle that only a thief can provide. He found a midden that could not be moved and moved it a little and found that the smell of it became the smell of persistence. He spoke with men of the faith who had survived and told them that if they wished to practice the faith as men wish to drink water, they must do so where water does not collect for disease, and then asked them to bless the latrines, which they did with the dignity of men who have learned that holiness and filth occupy the same ground more often than is preached. He sat with Bran. He set the chair so that the sun fell on Bran's hands. They did not speak for a while, because silence had a different sound with his brother, and because there was something in the air between them that required the space to be acknowledged. "You chose," Bran said eventually, and it was not praise and not critique. "That is a thing to do. I chose. I will keep choosing until I am not allowed to any longer," Jon said. "Is there advice from where you sit?" Bran's eyes did their thing, the little unfocusing that had nothing to do with sight and everything to do with seeing. "There is always winter," he said. "It is a dull thing to be said by a boy who sits as I sit. But dull things are useful. There will be stories. The stories will say that a great war was fought and that afterward the people did not slide into long peace and fatness and forgetting. The stories lie even when they mean well. New dangers grow from old ash. Watch. Set men to watch in places where men do not think watching is noble. Under stairs, in kitchens, in cellars. Ask women what they know before men. Ask children before both." "I will," Jon said. "Will you come south?" "No," Bran said. "I am too much of what I am to be comfortable here. The trees speak to me in a language that disappears when I cannot see their faces. I will. I'll send ravens. I will send men who speak my words. I will send you the kind of wisdom that comes in the wrong size and must be cut to fit. Do not thank me. I do not do it for you. I do it because it is my work." "Let me say thank you anyway," Jon said. Bran inclined his head a fraction, as if accepting a courtesy that, strictly speaking, had not been required by the protocol of the universe. Night came sooner in those late weeks, a shade earlier each day. As if the sun were a man leaving a dinner he did not enjoy as much as he wanted the host to think he did. The city changed its smell with the season. The rot sweetened, the smoke thickened, the river cooled and held its breath when the moon rose to see if it would be frozen by morning. Sansa's letters came from the north crisp and unadorned as the air she breathed. She sent numbers. She sent requests. She sent every second page a sentence that did not make it into the ledger but found its way into Jon's pocket. "Remember to eat. Remember the Aunt of Miri. The wolves have had a lean year for hares. The tailor you used to like has married a woman who makes candles that burn without smoke." Arya's letter did not come, which was exactly the kind of letter Arya sent when she had nothing to say. He did not resent her silence. He took it as he took weather. Grey Worm left. The ships went out into the light like coins being flicked into a large bowl. The men on the quay did not cheer. They did not jeer. Men who had stood with rigid backs breathed differently and then went back to counting sacks. Grey Worm spoke last words that were not sweet and were not bitter. "Do not become what you killed," he said. "It is an easy thing for men who kill tyrants to do. They roll themselves in the old clothes and call it laundry. Wear different cloth." Then he put his hand to his chest in a gesture that was not salute and not farewell and walked up the gangplank and did not look back. Jon stood until the ships were small smudges and then went to a meeting about sewers and listened as if sewers were a poem. When darkness fell that night, the wind shifted. It carried a smell of salt that was clean, and under it a smell that made the hairs on his forearms stand up. Cold, old, not of the city. He lay on his pallet and felt something like happiness. A small, careful thing. Settle in the corner and watch him. He did not approach it. He had learned that happiness, in the months he had known it, liked to come of its own accord and would not be wooed by effort. In the morning, the girl with the scraped nose appeared again with her cousins in tow, schooled them with the ferocity of a tiny captain into saying thank you for the regularity of bread and the new behavior of the billhook man, who had ceased to steal copper when it had been explained to him that he would be required to show his teeth each morning at the gate, and that their number would be counted, and that each missing tooth would be replaced with a pebble chosen by Miri from the quakeyard, which had proved a persuasive policy. He allowed himself to stand in the sun for 5 breaths. He allowed himself to look at men who had been enemies 2 weeks before and see that their hands, holding hammers, looked the same when they were not holding swords. He allowed himself the indulgence of thinking briefly about the day he would send for a chair made from nothing that had been in the old throne at all, something with wood and cloth and room for a man to sit without bleeding. He allowed himself to imagine the look of it, the curve of it, the way a back would be held, the way a child could clamber up into a lap while a law was spoken, not as disrespect but as an illustration of the things a law keeps. He did not allow himself the comfort of forgetting. He carried the memory of her into every room, not as penance but as a kind of stern teacher who reminded him how fire looks when it is convinced of its own righteousness. He learned to say her name in his head without it tearing anything open. He learned to say it aloud when it must be said without apology and without defense. He did not build a shrine. He did not forbid her shrines. If a woman lit a candle under a blackened arch and whispered a Targaryen name like it was a charm against miscarriages, he let her. If a man spat on the ash and made the sign men make when they want to keep a witch from listening, he let him. There had been too much forbidding already. Months stood up and sat down. A winter thin as a sheet came and laid itself over the city and forced it to move more slowly. More letters came. A ship from the free cities brought word of a plague that had begun to cough in the ports there. They screened the crew as carefully as any physician could, and still one old man died in his sleep and did not wake, and the contagion did not rise, either because of luck or because of the sewers or because of God, bored and pleased by the birds who had been arriving to be fed bread by Miri, decided to be kind. He stood again in the place where the hall had broken and watched the dust go golden with late light. Tyrion came to stand near him and said nothing. Davos walked in and out, a figure with a list in his hand, muttering to himself and scratching and pointing and generally being a nuisance to ignorance. Sam explained to a boy how to hold a shovel so that his back would not ache as soon. Sansa's emissary arrived with a look of satisfaction and a list that made Jon laugh for its comprehensiveness and for the salt thrown at the end, because the woman had learned to season even her minds with salt, a reputation that followed her letters. "Do you think," Tyrion said finally, speaking up as if breaking a vow made in the morning to keep silent until night, "that you will be good at this?" "No," Jon said. "I think I will be ordinary at it for a long time, and that is what we have not had in some time. And if I am very lucky, I will become good at it just in time to make one decision that will be remembered, and not because it was terrible. That is a wish that brings a man out of a war alive," Tyrion said. "Let us put it with the other wishes and see if any of them hatch." He leaned against a column whose soot had been partly scrubbed and sighed in a way that suggested a man who was preparing himself to say something unpalatable. "There is a woman. There is always a woman," he said. "She has come from Volantis with a red robe and a mouth full of fire and a slightly used god. She says there is a prophecy. She says, 'I have had prophets in my bed and in my battles,'" Jon said, and felt the weariness of that truth down where the bones of his ankles met the shoe leather. "I will hear her. I will not be dazed by her. She is beautiful," Tyrion said, as if that made a rhetorical difference. "Then I will be careful," Jon said. "They say the dragon has been seen again, and not far," Tyrion said, unable to keep his curiosity in leash now that the subject had turned. "They say it flew low as if looking for a door into the earth. They say it did not roar. They say it made a sound like—" He let it trail off because he had no useful simile. "They say," Jon repeated. "They always say." He turned his head and looked at the place where the sky was a different color at the edges, a kind of blue that knew about cold and did not apologize for it. "If he comes back, he will come back for reasons that have nothing to do with me. If he comes back and can be born, we will bear him. If he comes back and cannot, we will not pretend otherwise. You have the talent for saying things that do not sound like omens and therefore end up being the only omens worth writing down," Tyrion said. "You will make a boring king, Jon." "I hope so," Jon said, and felt in his chest the delicate pressure of relief that comes when a man has at last said his desire aloud in the worst place to allow it to be heard and has not been struck down by a god for impertinence. He stood and watched the day close its work. He had his list for the next morning. He had a crown that did not cut. He had a city that had decided, for the time being, to allow itself to be cared for. He had enemies who had gone to an island and might be building something there that would fail or would thrive, and either way the knowledge would come to him in a letter and he would not be able to do anything about it. He had a sister with a crown he would allow no man to knock off, and another sister riding west on a boat with a captain who would learn, after a week, to be terrified of her competence, and a brother whose eyes saw both nearer and farther than anyone could explain. He had a wolf who slept with his head on Jon's foot and snored like water in a pipe. He had choices to make, and none of them were the kind that feed the stories in which swords sing. He had work. In the very small hours, when the city's breath is most even and a king can hear his own thoughts if he invites them quietly, he woke to the sound of wing. It was not the flit of a raven. It was not the storm of a flock. It was a hoarse push of air that made the old beams speak. He rose and went to the broken window and stood with his palm on the sill that had been scorched and then planed by Gendry's apprentice until it no longer charred the hands of women who leaned on it to talk. The sky was a blank. He saw nothing. He smelled something like coal and like rain. He stood until the light changed faintly at the edge like the lip of a cup being illuminated. He did not wake the guards. He did not wake Tyrion. He did not say a prayer. He put his hand on his head, and the crown's ring was a warmth across his hair. He thought, not without a sharp little smile at himself, that he was wearing a forge. He thought and let thinking go. He waited for the city to make its morning noises, which it did, slowly and then all at once. He went to his list. He bent his head. He began.